It came out of work that the town and several employees started back in 2019. There was a broad cross-section of community leaders representing business, municipal government, private developers, affordable housing organizations, social services, arts, and the Regional Planning Commission. We all came together to kind of discuss the housing challenges that we were having in Brattleboro. And I'm sure that these are challenges that you're familiar with. An older housing stock that doesn't meet contemporary market demands in terms of amenity size and energy efficiency, an extremely low vacancy, rental vacancy rate, and housing affordability, and the fact that many homeowners and renters in town are cost burdened. They just are spending more than 30% of their income on their housing. And so the group identified the need for a comprehensive housing strategy. And we wanted a plan that was going to address housing needs for all, both the affordable and the market rate housing, rental and home ownership opportunities. And we wanted to consider the needs of all people in the community, regardless of race and gender. And so with the support of the Planning Commission, and the Brattleboro Select Board, the Planning Department applied for and received a $25,000 grant from the Vermont Municipal Planning Grant Program. And we were able to hire Camoin Associates, who you're going to meet in just a little bit, to begin working on this study. And so we recognize that safe, decent, and affordable housing is the foundation for successful outcomes. Meeting the housing needs creates a positive ripple in our economy. And for Brattleboro to remain a thriving hub, we must find cross-collaborative solutions to ensure that everyone is housed. I want to thank you all for taking the time to come tonight. We're eager to share the findings from the last 6 months of work and get back on the strategies that are being proposed. And I want to acknowledge that we had a steering committee, and some who are here tonight, they helped us get to this point. I'm not going to name everybody, but we had representatives from the Brattleboro Planning Commission, various housing related organizations, the Regional Planning Commission, Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, Out in the Open, and the NAACP of Windham County. Before I introduce you to our consultants, I just want to go over some general Zoom meeting procedures. We ask that you remain muted except when you want to comment. If you would like to comment, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom. We're going to have some graphics at the commenting time that can direct you to it, but basically I think it's under the reactions. If on the bottom of your screen, you might have some tabs. If you look on the reactions, there's a raise hand. For people who are attending here at the Municipal Center, you can raise your hands. You'll be picked up on this mic and you can definitely speak as well. We encourage you to. And it would be great if you could remember to identify yourself before you speak. That would be really helpful. I also want to thank my colleague, Steve Hayes. He's our planning technician. He's kind of behind the scenes, kind of running some of the behind the scenes Zoom. And so finally, I'd like to welcome Rachel Selsky and Dan Stevens from Camoin Associates, the consultants that have been working on this project. Rachel is a certified community planner and vice president of Camoin Associates. She's very familiar with Brattleboro, a recent resident.
Yes.
Dan Stevens is a certified community planner and is director of real estate services at Camoin Associates. And so thank you for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to Rachel.
Great. Thank you so much, Sue. I really appreciate that. And thank you again to everyone for being here, both in person in town as well as over Zoom. This hybrid option is a good one for a lot of people. And so I'm appreciative that you were able to make that happen, Sue. As Sue said, we have been working with the town for probably 6 months or so through the summer. And at this point, we have done quite a bit of data collection and we're starting to move into the strategy component of the project. And so that's what we're here today to talk to you about. So in terms of agenda, we did our welcome and introductions. I'm going to talk a bit about key findings and themes from the data the data research that we've done. Dan is going to go through some of the goals and strategies that we've developed as a result of the research and conversations that we've had. And then we'll talk a bit about wrap up and next steps. And we will be using something called Slido, which you don't need to do anything about it now. We will give you more instructions, but I did just want to give you a heads up. So it'll be an interactive, essentially a voting app where you can help us prioritize and identify which strategies are most important or least important. And so Dan will go through the instructions about that, but we did just want to give you a heads up. It's something you can do either on a web browser or on your smartphone. So just a heads up on that interactive piece. In terms of the work completed to date, we did a comprehensive analysis of the demographic and socioeconomic conditions in Brattleboro, as well as a housing supply and demand analysis, really to get at both the existing conditions in terms of what housing currently exists within the town and what are demographic trends saying about what will be in demand in the future. This project obviously was all going on in the midst of COVID. And so there are a lot of changes that are still happening. And a lot of the work that we're seeing is that the trends that maybe were in the past won't necessarily be in the future. And so we were really trying to meld the historic trends that Brattleboro has seen with the trends of COVID and the impact of the pandemic and people's choices that are coming out of that, as well as considering what does the town want for itself. And so the historic trends may not be what the town sees for itself or values or visions for itself into the future. And so trying to help identify what role does housing play in moving towards that vision for the future for the town. And so really melding all of that together through a combination of the data. We did a number of stakeholder interviews with a wide variety of representatives from the community, focus groups with realtor groups and the tenant unit and tenant groups. We participated in housing conversations with key housing service providers within the community. And we really started to understand what was going on. What are the key issues that many are facing within the community around issues of housing. We also had a really fantastic community survey. I'm sure thank you to many of you that got it out to your networks as well as completed it. We had a great response on the community survey, and that provided a lot of good feedback on what are the issues that residents are facing when they're considering issues around housing. And so that provided a lot of really good information from that perspective. So all of that was pulled together into a key finding summary that we reviewed with the town as well as with the steering committee, trying to really make sure we were all on the same page with what the data was saying, what the stakeholders were saying, make sure it really kind of is the experience that people are having within the community, kind of ground truthing the data and the information we were receiving. And out of that, we started to develop a draft strategy. And again, we reviewed that with Sue and the town and Steve, as well as with the steering committee. And we made some refinements, and that's where we are today. So I'll review some of the key findings. I don't think any of this will be, particularly surprising. It's things you live with every day in Brattleboro. And so I'll run through these. We are trying to keep to a pretty tight timeline. And so I'll kind of run through them. There's more detail provided in the full reports that will be issued along with the document. So in terms of key findings, the town of Brattleboro's population has been declining or stagnant over the last 10 years, and the number of families has decreased while senior population has grown. All of these have an impact on the housing needs within the community. There's been a real demand for rental units. The number of demand for rental units at an attainable price point has completely outstripped the availability of these types of units. You see it in the really low vacancy rates. You see it in the high demand and competitive nature of getting into rental units within the town of Brattleboro. And so this is clear in the data as well. There's a lack of new housing development. And so that has led to an underproduction of new housing, and therefore the houses that are needed are not coming onto the market, driving additional demand. And as a result of that growing gap between the supply and the demand for housing, the cost has become really unaffordable for local residents and workers. That combined with competition for housing from remote workers, as people are able to really choose lifestyle over location of jobs for where they want to live. Many people are choosing Brattleboro and other similar types of communities. Retirees and those nearing retirement choosing to be in Brattleboro and other communities like it, and seasonal homeowners has really pushed that affordability gap even further constraining local residents and workers who are looking for housing. There is a really high, Sue touched on this earlier on, there's a high level of residents that are either underhoused, so they're in a living situation with others when maybe they wouldn't want to be, or they're living in substandard units. And there are many residents that are overburdened. And so they're spending more than they is expected affordable or is considered affordable. So more than 30% of their income going to housing. And so that's really puts a strain on families and individuals, and it forces many to consider relocating. There's an imbalance that's further impacting marginalized populations. These housing issues have amplified social equity and diversity issues in Brattleboro, with the low-income minority populations experiencing the most adverse impacts of this imbalanced housing market. There are limited options for seniors to consider when they maybe want to move out of their single family home. There aren't many options for them. And so that is forcing many to stay in their home longer than they maybe want to, and also simultaneously taking those units, not allowing those units to go onto the market. And so there's less of an inventory for single family homes as older residents are staying in them for a longer period of time. The housing issues are not just housing, they are also impacting economic development in Brattleboro as employees are unable to find housing. Employers are finding it harder and harder to attract talent. And all of that is creating a really difficult situation for the employers and the employees who are looking for local short commute options, and it may force them to reconsider employment within Brattleboro. Our analysis identified a need for over 500 units in Brattleboro, really throughout the full spectrum of the market, but about 60% of the demand are for units that would be appropriate for households with incomes under $50,000. But really the full variety and full range of housing is in demand within Brattleboro. And the private market is not meeting this demand. So despite the strong demand and need for housing, there are issues that are making it not financially feasible for the private market to address these constraints alone. And so there is need for these public-private partnerships to figure out ways to address these issues of housing in the community. So those are really the key findings, and more of this is available, and more data is available in the full report. But these are kind of the key themes that came forward through the data that really drove our strategy development. And so with that, I will hand it over to Dan to walk us through the strategies and Slido.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. And I'll just add my thanks to everyone that's taking some time out of their evening to join us. I'm going to talk through some of the strategies that came out of these themes. So the issues and opportunities identified as part of the research and analysis went into informing strategies that can help address and solve some of these critical issues facing the community. And so we're going to try and make this a little bit more interactive for this section, a little bit more fun. We'll talk a little bit about that. But I did want to talk a little bit first, just to give everybody a sense of what this plan looks like at the end, and how we kind of structure this type of housing plan. We start with goal areas that are very broad and overarching, and those kind of become the organizational framework for a plan. And within each of those goal areas, there will be strategies. about 4 to 6 or so strategies for each goal. And again, these are more specific, but it's not the very detailed implementation steps. And those steps we refer to as tactics. And so for each strategy, there will be a set of tactics on how to essentially execute that strategy in a very kind of a step-by-step way. This evening, we are focused on the goals and the strategies. We are really looking for everyone's feedback and involvement in making sure that we have these strategies correct, that we're not missing anything, if there's anything that needs to be refined. And then after this evening, those strategies will kind of be refined and finalized, and then we'll be putting together those detailed tactics for each of those strategies. So, if you're thinking that these aren't, very detailed, just know that there is another level of detail that comes part of the final plan document. And so the 4 goal areas, again, these are the overarching structure, kind of the broad goal areas. I hate to read off a slide, but I'm going to anyways, because these are important. I want to make sure everyone understands these goal areas. So the first, work with developers to increase the supply of quality and diverse housing in Brattleboro. Right, this is pretty straightforward. As Rachel mentioned, there is a shortage of housing in the community, and we need strategies and methods for producing more housing units in the community. And so the strategies in this section are all about generating new housing units or rehabilitated housing units in the community. The second goal area, create new funding sources and strategies to create and rehabilitate affordable and middle income housing. Because funding and financing of housing development is such a critical issue and constraint, this becomes its own goal areas with a set of strategies. And, certainly one of the things coming out of all of our research, and it's not a surprise to many, I'm sure, is that the economics of building affordable and particularly middle income housing are just such that it doesn't make a lot of sense for private developers to build this type of housing. And so, it becomes a little bit of thinking outside of the box, thinking creatively about funding and financing sources to make that happen. The third goal area here, support residents in their efforts to find and retain quality housing. So the first 2 are certainly more geared towards the supply side and increasing housing in the community. In this goal area, it's all about working with and programs and activities around supporting residents and workers in their efforts to find housing. And then lastly, the 4th goal area, create an implementation framework by monitoring housing issues, communicating needs, building capacity, and collaborating on solutions with partners. So there's a lot in there, but this is all about making things happen, building capacity, building an environment in which these housing issues can be addressed. And we'll get into a little bit more about that. So let's go back to Slido. I promise this isn't complicated. This is supposed to be fun and not stressful. So we're going to try and walk you through this as best as possible. So don't panic. So if you've got your smartphone handy, or if you want to open up another tab on your web browser, just don't close out your Zoom meeting. You'll want to go to slido.com, SLIDO.com.
Or if you have your smartphone, you could just open your camera app and hold it over the screen so you see the QR code like you would at a restaurant or to see the menu.
We're just going to take a little pause to give everybody a chance to do that. So again, you'll want to either use your web browser or smartphone to go to slido.com, it's going to ask you for a code, and that code on the screen, 271152, is what you'll want to plug in. Or again, if you've got the technical skills to do the QR code, feel free to point your smartphone camera at that black and white code, and that'll take you to where you need to be. So we'll give everybody, again, just a moment here. And so this Slido tool is going to give you the opportunity to respond to some of these strategies. So essentially kind of doing some real-time polling here. So let's move on. Again, I'll remind folks how to get into Slido as we keep moving on here. For the Slido exercises, we're going to be asking you to rate each strategy based on how important you think it is. So this is all about your opinion. And so 1 star, not important at all. 5 stars, extremely important. So we're going to do a test run here. This was the most creative test that we could come up with. Wearing gloves in winter. Please tell us how important wearing gloves in winter is. 5 being extremely important, 1 being not very important at all.
Dan and I were struggling today. We must have had no creative juices left.
Right, writer's block at the end of the week. Yeah. Most people feeling that it's very important. Few folks don't mind cold hands. All right. Hopefully everybody's got the hang of this. Again, it's supposed to be fun. It's not mandatory. And if you're in person and don't have access to a smartphone, I'm sure Sue or Steve there can jot down your feelings on these. So it looks like 21 people have been able to take the poll. So that's great. That sounds like a lot of people are getting the hang of it. So again, we'll remind you about how to do this as we keep going through. There is, before we jump into the strategies, there is just one thing that I want to mention. A lot of these are written not necessarily for the town of Brattleboro itself to be the lead on. So, these are strategies that may also be led by other partners, and in some cases would be more appropriate for other partners or other entities to lead, and the town might have a supporting role. So I just want to keep that in mind, that we are not necessarily saying that the town itself, town leadership staff, take on all of these, as some things may be more appropriate for other entities to take on. And those will all be indicated in the final report. So in our first goal area, we have 4 strategies. And so again, this is working with developers to increase the supply of quality and diverse housing in Brattleboro. The first one, conduct study to identify potential sites, including both publicly or privately owned properties for housing development, and then acquire those priority properties. Right, there are some sites out there that are, I think, more well-known, and there are others maybe that haven't been uncovered yet. And so this is a process to identify places as a first step towards working with developers and generating new housing development and construction in the community. This 1B, attract a national, regional assisted living and or independent living developer. This is certainly something that came out in the analysis, the need for these types of senior housing options urgently needed in the community. 1C, act as a convener to proactively encourage developers to complete proposed and new residential housing projects. So again, this can take various forms, but the idea here is to, not only bring developers together and with the town, and to explore potential partnerships, but to do what's possible to support developers in their efforts to bring new housing to the community. And then the fourth and final one here, 1D, explore the creation of a housing cooperative development project to increase affordable home ownership options. And so if you're not familiar with what a housing cooperative is, it's a type of housing arrangement. It can be apartment style homes or other forms, but the idea here is that it's shared ownership. And so these are a great option for folks that might not have the credit or the down payment needed for a single family home. This is another option. This kind of shared ownership option makes it a little bit more affordable. To be in owner occupied housing, build equity, those types of things. And so we're going to go back to Slido now, and then we're going to do some polls, and then we are going to open it up for any questions and comments before we move on to the next goal area. So again, slido.com on your smartphone or web browser. When you go there, you can put in that code 271152. And you'll be able to take our polls here in just a second. Again, 1 star, not important at all. 5 stars, extremely important. So let's jump into it. How important do you think it is to conduct a study to identify potential sites, both publicly and privately owned, for housing development and acquire priority properties? We'll give folks a minute or two to think about a response. We are going to go somewhat quickly, so try and get your answers in there. I see a lot of 4s and 5s popping up. Some responses down there at the other end of the spectrum. Looks like we've got 17 responses in so far. We'll wait just a couple more seconds here. Doesn't look like too many more responses are coming up. So we've got a score here of 3.9 out of 5 overall. So hopefully the Slido is working well for everyone. Let's move on to the next one. How important do you think it is to attract a national or regional assisted living and or independent living developer? Again, this is all about bringing these types of senior housing projects to the community. It's interesting, some varied responses here.
Wow.
That's a very interesting result.
Huh.
Great, so 20 responses.
The national region.
Yeah.
We're gonna keep going, then we'll come back. I'm interested to hear some people that were on either end of the spectrum for that one. Let's move on to the third one. Act as a convener to proactively encourage developers to complete proposed new residential housing projects. How important do you feel that this is? A lot of 4s. Wait another second or two and get those responses in. At an average score of 3.9 right now. So half said 4, and we've got another 10% down at 1 and 30% at 5. All right, let's move on to the next one. Explore the creation of a housing cooperative development project to increase affordable home ownership options. 1, not very important. 5, extremely important. Average score of 4, so just a little bit higher than the last one. A little bit on the higher end. Great. All right. Good. I hope everybody's having fun with that. It makes it a little bit more interactive. We want to take a little bit of a pause now. If there's anybody that wants to ask a question, if you think anything needs clarification, if you want to share some thoughts about any of these, if you want to explain why you thought something was not important or extremely important, we'd love to hear from you. Again, on the bottom of your screen, you should see a reactions button if you've joined in Zoom. Once you click on that, you can click the raise hand button. Or if you're there in person, just grab Sue or Steve's attention and I'm sure they'll be able to call on you. So let me stop there, and Sue and Steve, let us know if you've got some folks that want to speak.
So it looks like Gemma has a hand raised. So Gemma, are you able to unmute? Yeah, okay.
Yes, I am. I just wanted to say on the subject of 1B, attracting a national or regional assisted living developer, I think we're probably going to see a lot of pushback on that, in that I think people are going to be very skeptical of inviting a large developer in. And I think we need to have more of a conversation about what exactly do we mean by assisted living. And we need to involve people like the Vermont Center for Independent Living to talk about possibly new ideas and new models about what assisted living can look like in Vermont and in Brattleboro in particular, rather than saying, oh, well, we just want to find some large developer to come in and give us their cookie cutter plan for what they think an assisted living development should look like.
Great, thank you, Gemma.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. And
So now with Gary.
Gary, do you want to unmute? Yeah.
Okay. I thought Sue you had good. Sorry about that.
Oh.
Hi, Gary Shaw, District 2 representative, and I'm part of the Planning Commission team. Awesome. 1D, I think the big thing for a lot of people are low income looking for some type of ownership. And I think that's a very important thing if people want to come out of some cases, depending on what they're in a marginalized or in an area of low income, having their own personal home or cooperative home. I came from New York, and there's a lot of co-ops in New York, people having ownership and having a piece of that action that's going on. That it's sort of like when you go out to West B, I believe that home trailer park, people have invested or put vested in their own properties and ownership. And I think that makes a big difference to a lot of people, rather than just having to feel, well, I have to rent every day, rents due, with having that ownership brings some type of propriety to a person and feels good about it, for an individual to have that, and gives them that independence of saying, hey, look, I put something into this, and, I really want to take time and to really better my area, my situation too, because I've really put a lot into that. So I think some type of cooperative development, affordable housing ownership, increase with that is very important to a lot of people of marginalization and low income in these areas, because I'm quite sure they would like to get out of the situations and places that they're in. They like to get advanced as well too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gary.
So we have Harris.
Hi there. First, thanks for all this work. I really appreciate it. And my question is on this goal, there are presumably reasons why developers haven't been building here. And I could make assumptions about why I think developers haven't been building here as much as we want. But what do we know about what's keeping developers from building here over the last several years? And do these 4 strategies address those key reasons why they haven't been building?
Yeah, I can address that. That's a complicated. I mean, it's a great question because it's got a complicated answer, and there's a lot of factors at play. There are local factors and there are macro factors at play. Generally, the funding question is the big constraint, right? With affordable housing, right, there are programs and there are incentives, and it tends to be a little bit easier. But when we talk about kind of in the middle, that middle income housing, that's when it really becomes an issue where, with construction costs, which, are relatively high in Vermont relative to many places around the country, which is certainly not helping the equation. But, even most places are in a situation where, with construction costs, they just don't support those price points that, for the middle income housing that's really, really needed. And so, this is kind of what I would say is the driving reason as to why, this type of housing has not been built in Brattleboro and elsewhere. There's certainly other factors coming into play, whether there are, there's not a lot of easily developable sites that are, ready to go for housing. And so, there are some out there, and, things are happening on some of those sites, but that's another factor coming into play. When we do get to goal 4, there will be some other examples, I think, of strategies to better facilitate development in the community. But I would say those are the big ones, and I'll certainly let Rachel or Sue chime in if they'd like.
Yeah, I'll just echo that it's a combination of high construction cost, high labor cost, high permitting and anti-development sentiment, kind of pushing out people who may be considering doing development. And then once they finally build, the prices that they can get for those units just don't the numbers don't just don't pencil out. And so while these 4, I think your question was, does this get to addressing that? These 4 are kind of a first step. I would say the second one, that is more around the funding and public-private partnerships and ways to address the funding, get at kind of that big elephant in the room, which is the money side of things.
Okay, we have Scott.
Thank you very much. I'm here more of a community leader, but I can sort of provide a personal perspective and therefore a specific question. I lived in downtown Brattleboro in the Brooks House, which of course easily and automatically placed me in over that 30% of your income going towards housing. In fact, it was much closer to 50 to 75%.
Wow.
However, I would be able to and would be willing to pay that if I could own it rather than pay rent. So I really liked the comments that Gary Stroud made earlier, and that there is a real attraction for ownership. So I was wondering if, and my question is, in terms of needs and solutions, are condominiums, would that be cost effective for developers to build, wherein in the purchase of those condos, they would be able to meet their expenses and people would be willing to pay a high cost per month if they had ownership? And so what I've found very sort of disappointing about Brattleboro, and eventually I had to move out of the downtown area, though I absolutely love it and I work downtown, I found that what I could afford, I could not buy. And I didn't want a big house.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to move out of the town and out of the state. So I'm wondering if condominiums where homeowners could buy would be cost effective for developers to build. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I don't know if we have an exact answer for that, but I think it is definitely part of the full spectrum of potential housing types that will be considered. So I don't have an exact answer. I don't know, Dan, if you do, but.
I mean, maybe not an exact answer. I mean, I do think there's probably some opportunity for condominium development. The financial feasibility aspects of doing condos are pretty challenging. You know, we talk to a lot of developers, you know, just generally, not necessarily, you know, as part of this project, but generally, you know, the view on condos is not particularly favorable. Developers tend to want to gravitate towards more, you know, on the rental side of things. But you know, to your point, I think there's demand there. I think it definitely becomes an issue of whether the development community would produce those. And, you know, there's certainly, you know, the opportunity for the town to have some influence, you know, potentially over that, you know, and, you know, it also gets into some of the funding. And so, you know, with our next goal area, you know, with some of the proposed programs, funding sources, you know, that's something that, you know, the town or, you know, partners as part of new funding programs could choose to support and encourage in the community.
I want to keep moving through the questions, but just keep an eye on the time since we do have 4 of these to get through. So go ahead, Steve, if you want to select the next person.
So now we have Wyndham and Windsor.
Hey folks, it's Elizabeth Bridgewater with the Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust. I wanted to mention that I put a link in the chat that to a presentation that our Director of Real Estate Development gave at the Wyndham Regional Commission recently. And it goes through the economics of housing development in a level of detail that I think if anybody's really interested in more detail, that's a good time, a good hour spent. The other thing I just wanted to say, I was probably the lone voter on 1C, saying that that wasn't that important. And I think you've already answered why. I don't think, at least in Brattleboro, because Brattleboro is very supportive of housing development, being, you know, acting as a convener isn't the biggest barrier to why projects don't move forward. It's really about funding, permitting, and environmental concerns. There's a whole bunch of things that can delay a project, but whether or not the town is a convener isn't typically one of them. So I was the outlier there, and that was why. So I want to explain that.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that.
We have Robert Oster.
If you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I actually put a comment in the Slido chat, and I thought that 1D seemed to be maybe more ready for movement than the other strategies. And I was thinking about Tri-Park, and I think Gary mentioned Tri-Park as well, that it is a cooperative arrangement, and there's a lot of town backing to that. The town, I think, loaned money initially to get it started. And now that ARPA money is coming down, is there a way to do a cooperative arrangement really quickly, if we can, as quick as we can, knowing that construction is going to delay things? But is Tri-Park a model for us? That's the question.
Great, thank you. We'll make a note of that.
So now we have Daniel Quip.
Hi there. I was wanting to get, I don't need the information right now, but I would like the information at some point. I'm on the select board and some of this will end up in front of us.
Yep.
You know, there was this, the comment that Rachel made around high construction costs, high permitting costs in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to see actual comparisons between, you know, Vermont's costs and other, you know, comparable states, neighboring states, regional states. You know, I've heard this a lot, and I just would like to see some numbers.
Yeah, Oh, that's a good point. That's a good idea, Daniel. And
Thank you.
and we can work with the town on thinking through that. I mean, even not to belabor the point, but even if that's just the perception, it might still drive people away. So even if we find that in fact it isn't that much different, I think that could be a really good educational point to kind of put out there. And so I think even if it's proven that Vermont isn't, you know, as high cost comparatively, I think that's a great point to put out there. So that's a good idea. Thank you, Daniel.
So now we have Kurt Dimes.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Can't get my camera working. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can, yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kurt Dimes. I live in Brattleboro. I don't hear the tone of emergency that I would expect, and I don't see the any urgency in the types of proposals. I was thinking that one thing could be done that I brought up with appropriate authorities in town a few months ago was relaxation of building codes so that people could add bedrooms or increase occupancy. And the reason that this couldn't be done was because then you'd have a conflict with the requirements for parking spaces. And that's exactly what I mean. You know, are we going to worry about parking spaces, or are we going to worry about living spaces? So I was hoping that Sue could speak to the select board and the sustainability coordinator about a more realistically urgent attitude, which cuts a few corners. That's what you do, I think, in an emergency. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think we should move on to the next strategy here, just to keep us moving. Feel free to leave comments in the chat box. I'll definitely make note of them, and we can come back if we have time.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So let's keep our momentum going here. Our second goal area, again, is around funding, create new funding sources and strategies to create and rehabilitate affordable and middle income housing. And so the first strategy, establish a Brattleboro Community Housing Opportunity Fund. So a new fund that manages receiving and distributing funds for projects that align with the community goals. Again, not necessarily saying that the town should be the owner of that fund, but generally speaking, there does seem to be a very critical need for this type of new fund. Explore potential to establish an employer-assisted housing program. Employers are hurting in Brattleboro because this is a workforce housing issue, and struggling to find housing for workers, attract, retain workers, and so on. And many have expressed an interest in being part of the solution. And so these types of programs can take different forms, but generally is about engaging employers and in solving some of these housing issues. Create a pre-development loan program to help developers with the early costs associated with development. This is certainly another one of those kind of pain points in the development process, and one of those constraints that's affecting the delivery of new housing in the community. So pre-development, we're talking about things, upfront engineering, architecture, the permitting process. And that is a barrier and constraint. And so, having this type of loan program helps developers get through that kind of initial hurdle. 2D, advocate for a more permanent funding stream for the rental rehab program for private landlords to make improvements. Consider leadership role in directing program income aligned with need. And then 2E, consider using a portion of current or new revenue. And some examples, might include sales, rooms, real estate, short-term rental, and other, just as some examples of what we're talking about there for housing specific projects. So we're gonna go back to Slido. So grab your phones or pull up your other browser tab here. You'll want to go to slido.com again. You'll put in this code 271152, or you can point your smartphone camera at that black and white code on the screen. And we'll give everybody a second to get organized. And then we're going to go through and ask you to respond to each of those strategies. Again, 1 star, not important at all. 5 stars, extremely important. So establish a Brattleboro Community Housing Opportunity Fund that manages receiving and distributing funds for projects that align with the community's goals, housing goals. Give everybody a chance to get your response in. Let's see, 13 responses in so far. A lot of 4s and 5s. Give it just another second or two if you want to get your final response in. 4 and 5 tied, 41%. Great, so generally pretty favorable response to that one in terms of level of importance. Let's move on to the next one. How important is it to explore the potential to establish an employer-assisted housing program? 1, not important. 5, extremely important. Twelve responses in. 2 seems to be the most common answer here. Folks don't seem to be thinking that this one is as important as the previous fund one so far. 17 responses in if you want to make your final choice. So an average score of 3.1 out of 5 for this one. 2C, how important is it to create a pre-development loan program to help developers with the early costs associated with development? This would potentially be something that comes out of that new fund that was part of 2A. 13 responses in, a lot of 5s up there. Average score of 3.8, 17 responses in.
Good.
Great. Let's move on to the next one. 2D, advocate for a more permanent funding stream for rental rehab, the rental rehab program for private landlords to make improvements. Consider leadership role in directing program income aligned with need. About 9 responses in so far, 11. Score of about 3.8 so far. So we'll give it another second or two if you want to make your final choices. An average score of 3.7 for this one. And then our last one here, consider using a portion of current or new revenue. So examples might include sales tax, rooms tax, real estate excise tax, short-term rental fees, or others for housing specific projects. And 7 responses in so far, 9. A lot of 5 so far for this one. That's 16 responses if you want to make your final choice. And then we're gonna, again, take a little pause and it'll open it up for some discussion and feedback.
Yeah, we'll probably stick to about 5 or 7 minutes for the feedback.
So again, if you want to hit the raise your hand button by going to reactions, or if you're there in person, just feel free to get Sue's attention, raise your hand, and we'll let Steve and Sue call on folks.
Yes, we have somebody from here.
I'm not sure I understand 2E. What housing specific projects, what kinds of things would that be?
Yeah, I'll start, Dan, and then you can.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off. So that would be to be determined. So it would likely be housing specific projects as determined by the community. So it would likely be one of the sources of income for the Brattleboro Community Housing Opportunity Fund, which would then manage the monies and distribute it based on a series of decision categories and prioritization from the community.
So Harris and Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust, your hands are up. I think that they may have been up from before. I didn't see them go down. So if you don't speak, okay, thanks.
Harris might still be up.
Yeah, so Harris, do you want to speak? Okay, let's go with Gary.
Okay, my camera's not working either. Oh, wait a minute, there it is. Okay.
There you
So,
are.
hi. So the 2C, I guess it's going to coincide with what Daniel Quipp was mentioning. Just trying to get a statistics on the engineers and the architects and what the cost of labor is, not just labor, but material.
Right.
I spoke to a few of the materials are very costly now. We don't know what next year will hold or with this new infrastructure bill. So I don't know if we're cognizant about this now in line to what's going to be coming down from the bill itself, what costs are going to be helping out with building and materials and things. So I think that alongside with that, Rachel or Dan, if you can get that information too, to see what the bill is incorporating for that. And also with this too, as well, with what developers are running into, because I know it is a high cost, and not just cost, but getting, workers as well too, because
yes,
what they get, that's a major thing too. So like I said, I spoke to a lot of, they can't seem to attain, let alone retain any workers for many various reasons. So I think 2C is a very important thing to really get more information on. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gary.
So we have a question in the comments from Robert about CDBG grants, if anyone wants to touch that one.
I can speak that. So the question is, wouldn't the Community Development Block Grant Program Fund be the fund that would appropriately earmarked for this purpose? So the program income funds that we get from community development block, that we, the town, gets from community development block grants, particularly loans, as they revolve, they come to the town as program income, and they have definitely been used to support affordable housing projects in the community. So I don't know all the ins and outs of what they can be used for, economic development and housing for low income populations, for sure. I'm not sure if it was going to kind of market rate housing, whether or not that could be an appropriate funding source for a fund.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the key point, is that oftentimes there are very specific uses for great reason, but there is need throughout the spectrum. And so there's that middle market need isn't always addressed through things like the Community Development Block Grant Program and other sources.
We have a question from, or we have a hand from Chloe.
Hi, yeah, this is Chloe Leary. Can you all hear me? Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm not. Okay, great. Yeah, that was my sense, Bob. I was wondering if your question was specifically about this strategy, and I just think that that funding source is limited. We need something broader, more flexible to actually collect a bunch of different funding streams to be creative across the whole continuum. And so I think that CDBG money is like one piece of the puzzle, but not broad enough to cover this whole strategy. That's my perception anyway.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Chloe. Okay. Let's move on then. And again, if you want to add something in the comments, that would be fine.
Right.
Go ahead. Yep.
Our third goal area, so if you recall, support residents in their efforts to find and retain quality housing. So we've talked a lot about the production of housing from the more the development and funding side. This is really, those strategies targeted towards local households, local workers. How do we assist them with housing issues? And so there's a good number in here, but let me walk through them. Establish a new housing specialist position at the town to assist with distribution of information, plan implementation, align town goals and efforts with housing needs, and participate in townwide efforts that focus on addressing housing issues. So a dedicated housing person at the town, we found, a lot of communities have had a lot of success with those types of positions. And, given the nature of, it was said, the urgency of the housing situation, in Brattleboro and many communities facing the same, having a person that can really tackle that. Establish a local licensing program for contractors to increase quality and skill and prevent landlords, homeowners from getting taken advantage of. Participate in and encourage ongoing and improved communication between tenants and property owners to establish mutual understanding and opportunity for collaboration. So, all about the relationship between tenants and property owners in the community, making sure that there's productive conversation occurring between those types of groups. Consider further incentivizing accessory dwelling units, converting underutilized spaces in existing homes, and property maintenance to increase the number of housing units and affordability of home ownership. So it's, if you're an individual property owner, the things that would fall under this one would be, things to encourage you to maybe think creatively about converting a space on your third floor or, an apartment above your garage, those types of things. 3E, explore adoption of blight ordinances and the potential for improving code enforcement to address quality, health, safety concerns, and aesthetics, all of those types of things addressed by blight ordinances. 3F, create a virtual housing office on town website to provide guidance to renters on their rights, housing data, a dashboard, tracking progress in implementing this plan, its strategies, housing information, other resources, and contact information. Basically a one-stop shop. You can go to a single page and that will have a lot of information, and it will also point you to the right direction for various types of things, other partner websites and so on. But, this would be a starting place for all things housing in the community. So let's go to Slido. Again, if you joined us late, you can go to slido.com on your smartphone or pull up another browser window. And once you're there, you can put in this code 271152. And we'll run through each of these strategies and ask you to rate them again. 1 star, not important at all. 5 stars, extremely important. So establishing a new housing specialist position at the town. How does everyone feel? How important is that? 7 responses so far, a lot of 3s. Maybe people are a little bit on the fence about this one. More 3s, got 15 responses in. So kind of a pretty even split, right around 3.1 is our average. A good number of 1s and a good number of 5s too. I'd be interested to hear people's reasons for their selection on that one. 3B, establish a local licensing program for contractors to increase quality and skill, prevent landlords, homeowners from getting taken advantage of. How important is this in the community? Give everybody a couple more seconds to get your response in. Quite a few 1s on this one. One and 2. Folks not feeling that this one is particularly important, it seems. Got 18 responses in, average score of 2.6 on this one. All right, interesting. 3C, participate in and encourage ongoing and improved communication between tenants and property owners to establish mutual understanding and opportunity for collaboration. So how important is it to maintain those lines of dialogue and communication? Got 10, 12 responses in so far. Kind of an even distribution, a little bit on the 1 and 2 side of things. A score of 2.8. So a lot of 1s and 2s on this one.
Great.
All right. 3D, consider further incentivizing accessory dwelling units, converting underutilized spaces, property maintenance. Again, this is kind of the creatively finding new housing units for homeowners and so on. And again, this kind of goes a step beyond, just allowing, but, actively finding ways to incentivize these types of things.
Oh, great.
A lot of 5s here.
Yeah.
And an average score of 4.2 so far. Looks like we got 18 responses. About 2/3 put a 5 for this one. Great. All right, let's move on to the next one. The exploring adoption of blight ordinance or ordinances and the potential for improving code enforcement. So how important does everyone feel that these things are? Looking at, potentially a blight ordinance in the community and, ways to improve code enforcement throughout the town. About 15 responses in. That's an interesting distribution here. A lot of different feelings about this one. A score of 3.1. Another second or two to get your final answer in. All right, great. Create a virtual housing office on the town website. So the one-stop shop webpage on the town, all things housing. How important is this? 1, not important, 5 being extremely important. About 12, 15 responses in. A lot of 5s for this one. Average score of 3.7 so far. Make your final choice. We'll go on to the next one. I believe this might have been our last, actually.
I think so.
Great, some interesting results on that one.
Yeah. All right.
Does anyone have an immediate question or comment? I know I've got some of those I'm interested to hear more about.
So Gary,
Okay. Well, I liked definitely 3C because I have a very good relationship with my landlord. I've been here now 14, 15 years. And I believe having a good relationship with your landlord or homeowner is a great thing. Consider for incentive accessory dwelling units. Is that dealing with ADA, you're saying, basically? People with disabilities, getting housing, converting underutilized spaces. I was just wondering, I was looking to see if that was somewhere incorporated in there too, as well. 3A, I wasn't, that's something I guess somewhere down the line, but definitely 3F to having that type of website so people can navigate moving into the town, let alone in the town, so they can find affordable housing or proper homes or housings for themselves and their people who are interested in getting into some type of home dwelling as well, also to have that ownership and propriety and feeling equal and accessible as everyone else in the town. But explore adoptive blight ordinances. Can you expound on that and clarify that a bit more?
Sue, could you talk to that one a bit?
Sure. So this one kind of has to do with stability of neighborhoods. So if there's not much enforcement that we can do on a blighted property, one that's not well kept, unless there's a health issue. And sometimes that begins to affect the neighborhood. And yeah, so it's really about how can we get people to maintain properties so that it's not impacting other residents of the neighborhood.
Oh, in a cooperative way, correct, Sue?
Well, yeah, initially, we'd be trying to work cooperatively with property owners who are not providing upkeep to their properties.
So I guess one last question. I feel like Colombo. So what are the hurdles, I guess, or the issues right now that we're dealing with that I'm unaware of about these type of ordinances and if that's the case, how can they get changed?
Sure. So right now with single family properties, we don't have any sort of mechanism. If it's not a health problem, we don't have a mechanism to try to improve a property. And so oftentimes in our office, we take complaints because somebody's not maintaining the property. If it's a rental property, and again, it's a health, there's health issues at play, then under state statute, we have more ability to, handle that and to enforce on that. But with single family homes, we don't have that ability under state statute.
I see.
And so with the overall goal in supporting residents to find and retain quality housing, a property that's not being maintained and of course, maintenance is subjective. So it's really
absolutely.
We're not talking about somebody didn't mow their lawn for 2 weeks and then you'd want to have some enforcement against them. It would be deeper than that. Fellows Falls has a blight ordinance, and it's a pretty progressive. It starts off, trying to establish this relationship and get cooperation, and then it's progressive in its way of handling it. And ultimately, I think it's an enforcement action of their select board. So.
Oh, okay. Hopefully, we'll have that indoctrinated along with this. That'd be great. Thank you, Sue.
So we have a question in the chat from Christine asking about how the ADU incentivization can be prevented from going into short-term rental and Airbnbs.
Good question. I think it would be all about how it was written, and then we are not suggesting regulating or restricting Airbnbs in this strategy. But if down the road the community started seeing greater impact from Airbnbs, there are certainly ways that other communities have found to restrict Airbnbs within the community. So I think it would be a combination of how the incentives are written and really encouraging it to be for homeowners and owner occupied buildings, and and owner or occupied units. And then down the road, it might be more about some regulation or restrictions around short-term rentals.
So we have a hand from Chloe.
Yeah, I want to say, I think all these strategies are great, and it's a matter of prioritizing, right? So it's sort of like, which ones are going to get us furthest fastest? So, and then I also want to observe that some of this work is being done in the community already. And so if we're doing a housing specialist position, or if we're looking at ADUs, like Bob, Brattleboro area affordable housing has been working on ADU stuff for years. So let's make sure that we're not recreating the wheel and we're tapping into what's already happening in the community. I know you said that explicitly, like this doesn't mean the town is going to do it, but I just feel like it's really important to say, like lots of this is happening, and let's bring everybody together through the housing coalition, for instance. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chloe.
So we have a question in the room.
So I'm Anna Marie Pluhar, and as many of you know, I run a nonprofit called Sharing Housing, Inc. And of course, I look at 3D and I see further incentivizing accessory dwelling units, but we could also give people grants to make their homes more comfortable for shared housing. And we would immediately create more housing. And one of my dreams is to see shared housing built. Most people want a bedroom, a sitting room, and a bathroom. And then they can share a kitchen, et cetera, et cetera. If we built that, then we'd have a place for seniors to age in place, and they would leave their single family houses, which would then be on the market. So I came to this meeting to put sharing housing into the conversation, because I think that it is such a potentially good thing to do long-term. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So we have a hand from Gemma.
Hi. Yeah, that really goes to what I was saying before about assisted living types. And I think we really need to have a conversation that looks for innovative ways to provide a diverse range of housing solutions that work for many different people. My mother is disabled, and I'm partially disabled myself. And, I've often said that I think all of us should really consider ourselves only temporarily abled. Most of us at some point in our lives will experience some sort of an injury, or through aging, we will need accessibility in our houses. And, and I've said this in meetings before, but over 30% of Vermonters now live in single person households. And it's kind of lonely. I'm one of those people. I would really prefer to be more in a centralized area where I can interact with more people on a daily basis. But I wanted to address some of the other items here. And 3B, establishing a local licensing program for contractors. I'm really struggling to see how that would be feasible for the town itself, or how it would be in any way better than any sort of licensing that the state already operates. Again, I've said this in previous meetings, but we're now in a public meeting, so a lot of people haven't heard this before. I feel very, very strongly about establishing a town office for housing, and these points of 3A, 3C, and 3F, I really see as the job of that office. As far as 3D is concerned with incentivizing accessory dwelling units, I'm all for ADUs. I just don't necessarily think that is a leading strategy to address the extreme housing shortage that we have in this area. We need to be looking at much larger projects as the primary solution. We need apartment buildings. That's what it boils down to. We need more density. We need to, instead of putting an accessory dwelling unit in one house, we need to remove that house and put 8 units where it was. So, and I'll end it there.
Great, thank you, Gemma.
Sure.
I really appreciated your participation in the meetings, and thank you for speaking today.
So we have
if we have just 1 or 2 more, and then we got to move on. Go ahead, Steve.
We have a question in the chat about blight ordinances and their relationship to creating social injustice. If anyone
Yes,
touched to that.
I see that, and I appreciate that comment. I've made a note of it, and we'll be sure to make note of that. So thank you so much, Maria.
And now we have Dan Handy.
Yes, hi, this is Dan Handy. I wanted to get to the need for 3A, but by way of answering or addressing one of the questions in the chat about Habitat for Humanity. Gary and I, as part of the Planning Commission, have had this discussion and looked into it a little bit. And I just wanted to share an interesting aspect of that, because there used to be several years ago a Habitat affiliate in Brattleboro, which many of you may know of, and it shut down. And I actually, within the last year, I've talked with the Rutland office and the Springfield office, or affiliates they call themselves. And by the way, there are alternatives to Habitat which don't involve sweat equity. So just to address that question, there are other organizations, of course, but just as a model, it's interesting that the affiliate in Brattleboro, apparently, and this, I don't know too much about it, but apparently it essentially shut down because the folks involved were over committed and not really able to run it. And this really points to the need for the housing specialist position because, excuse me, you know, a lot of folks in town are volunteering and doing a variety of things, and the town could really support the type or the spirit of what Habitat can do. And so I just wanted to put that note in, that there is that local history, and that they are actually interested in rejuvenating an affiliate in Brattleboro, but the organization doesn't make it easy to open one.
Great. Thank you, Dan. All right, Dan, let's go to the last strategy here.
And so our last goal area here, create an implementation framework by monitoring housing issues, communicating needs, building capacity, and collaborating on solutions with partners. And so for A, I'll just go through these quickly. Encourage and support conversations around issues of inequity and discrimination in housing, and identifying opportunities for repair. For B, regularly review and update land use regulations to align with housing related goals. So, you know, things around zoning would all fall under that one. Create a short-term rental registration program to monitor potential impacts on the local housing market. Address labor-related issues in the local housing industry through partnerships with local workforce development organizations. Undertake a public educational campaign around the issue of housing, the role of housing in economic development, and alternative housing options. And then 4F, here, work with partners to convene a regional housing summit to explore regional solutions to housing issues. You know, certainly the importance of thinking about housing on a regional basis is really critical. And so that one starts to get to that a little bit. So let's do our final round of Slido polling. Again, slido.com. I think everybody's got the hang of this now. 271152. 1 star, not important. 5 stars, extremely important. So encourage and support conversations around issues of inequity and discrimination in housing, and identify opportunities for repair. How important is this in the town of Brattleboro? I see 9 responses in. Give everybody another second or two. Got fewer responses. I don't know if some folks had to hop off. I know we're kind of pushing up against our time limit. So thanks everyone for sticking it out to the end here. 12 responses, a score of 3.8. Let's move on to the next one. regularly review and update land use regulations to align with housing related goals. Again, this is broad, but there will be more specifics, of course, in the final plan. But you know, addressing things around zoning to better facilitate the development of housing and other goals around housing. So a lot of 5s with this one.
Great.
Put your final answer there in there and we'll move on. Create a short-term rental registration program to monitor potential impacts on the local housing market. Again, this is one that is not saying regulate. This is simply to have a program to monitor, understand exactly what's going on with respect to short-term rentals, how many are there, and so on. How important is this? 5 being most important. %, picked 5 on this one. 15 responses in. Well, great. I think I went back there by accident. All right, let's move on to the next one. Address labor-related issues in the local housing industry through partnerships with local development organizations. So I know this issue around labor came up a little bit in the context of you know, building housing and, you know, finding labor. So that's one example of these labor-related issues. Others are, you know, around finding people that can come and do the required inspections for projects to move forward, you know, these types of things. So how important is this? Let's take another moment or two. A lot of 5s again for this one. An average score of 4.0. There's probably 1 or 2 more responses out there if you want to make your final choice. Undertake a public educational campaign around the issue of housing, the role of housing in economic development and alternative housing options. So this is really, you know, making sure the public understands, is aware of, you know, how much of an important issue this is in the community. 50% chose 5 so far. All right, get those final responses in. 4F, work with partners to convene a regional housing summit to explore regional solutions to housing issues, right? The town of Brattleboro doesn't exist in a vacuum, and this is all about engaging neighboring communities, you know, thinking more broadly, coming together to think of regional solutions. How important is this? 43% picked 5. Got an average score of about 3.9.
It's a little lower than I expected, I think.
16 responses in. So quite a few 3s here. So maybe folks a little bit on the fence about this one as well. All right, well, I know we're a little bit over 7:30s, but if you know, if folks would like to stay on, we're happy to hear your thoughts. We can take a couple minutes here and open it up for any feedback on anything related to goal 4 here.
So I see that Gemma's hand is up. Did you leave it up, or did you have anything you wanted to add for this?
No, sorry, I left it up.
No worries. We have Gary.
So I like 4A because that brings about inclusion and not exclusion with everyone that's in Brattleboro and anyone moving into. 4B also is a good thing. Also having to work with part of the regional housing to explore other solutions down the road as we're starting with this new infrastructure and planning other things down for new affordable housing, sustainable housing that me and the awesome team of the Planning Commission here in Brattleboro are doing. And getting some education also is an important thing too for people who don't know how to buy homes. It's very important. First-time home buyers or people who've just been renting all their lives know nothing about what it is, what to do. I, on the other hand, know how to navigate through those waters, but it's uncharted water for some, and some people who don't know how to work, not just navigating it, but also the computers and things, but having workshops and things like that in order for that to have that happen. People who are knowledgeable and that could reach out and help these people. Creating a short-term rental registration program to monitor potential impacts. So can you define that a little bit more, short-term rental registration program?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that, Gary. So, short-term rentals, we're talking about things like Airbnbs, VRBO. These are the types of units. So if you own property and you were, renting out a room or an apartment, something like that on one of those types of, short-term rental networks, typically, once a year, once every 2 years, you would have to, fill out a pretty simple form, submit that to the town, kind of has an overview of, so kind of the basic characteristics of your unit and, those types of things. So it's, that's pretty much what it is. And then, the town side can see, the number of units being used for short-term rentals. Is that something that's exploding and, something we need to look at? Is it staying pretty constant? It's just, it's another piece of information to allow the town to make, educated and decisions moving forward.
Well, I agree because, Dan, a lot of these homes now are converting to that. People moving up, putting in their places Airbnb or short-term for people who want to just rent for 6 months, short-term, whatever tax reasons. And how does that impact people who are looking for long-term or permanent housing? So that is a big issue, I guess, that we need to address as well also, and how they might come into play. Because I think a while back, the state was considering asking or having Airbnb participate into housing people, what their thoughts were on that. So I don't know where that went. So I'm just interested in getting the findings on that, the facts as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
I won't go into the numbers, but if you saw the draft housing data analysis that's on the planning department website, Camoin did do some data analysis on the number of short-term rentals that are in Brattleboro at this time. So,
do you have that number, Sue? You don't know? No, you could just send it to me. I'm just interested myself in seeing how that major impacts in areas that people are trying to build homes and housings.
I don't recall what it is off the top of my head, but I'll get it to you, Gary.
Thank you, Sue.
There. I don't see any other hands. There's some good comments in the chat about activities happening regionally and Windsor Housing Trust's homeownership programs. I think that one last opportunity for hands. All right.
Good. Dan, I can wrap up. You've been talking a lot.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it, Rachel. I'll just say thanks everyone for joining tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So from here, we will be further refining the strategies. And as Dan had mentioned, really building out the tactics. So the individual steps that are required for each of the strategies. I think the voting that was done today will really help us prioritize, and we may be able to, take out some of the less impactful strategies and really focus in on resources on the things that'll be most important. So that'll help us refine that. we will be working with Sue and the steering committee to wrap that up. And I believe we're presenting at the select board meeting in December, in the first week of December. So we'll be there, and then we'll be just wrapping it all up and handing it off to Sue and her team. So that's the next steps. We'll have it all wrapped up before the end of the year. But I really appreciate, this has been a fantastic event tonight. I appreciate the hybrid model. Steve, you did a great job facilitating all of the different moving pieces. And I thought it was successful. So thank you all so much, and have a good evening.
You guys were amazing. Thank you so much. You guys were awesome. And thank you, Sue, and everyone else. Really, this means a lot to a lot of the people moving forward now, next year, getting this going in this town. And it really means a lot. Thank you guys so much, and hope to see you again, and have a good Thanksgiving.
Great.
Thank you. You too.
Take care,